So, oops.
5-second rule.
This is microbiology class. We know that that's both not true and kind of irrelevant. So let's do that. So this is Dannon plain, I guess whole milk yogurt in combination with Indian hot mango, extra hot mango chutney.
We get to watch the one from today. Wait,
That's good. Sure nobody wants it?
They talk about a chance of
Nicole says it's level 2 now.
Is it really?
We're in level 1 right now.
Okay. So today, in between bites, we're talking about metabolism. And the reason why I'm suffering up here, consuming this combination of yogurt and mango pickle, Indian pickle, extra hot, and a half sour pickle, is that these are all products of fermentation. And fermentation is an important component of what bacterial metabolism is all about. Other sorts of things, there are certainly eukaryotes that ferment, but the majority of fermenters out there are bacteria, and we use fermentative properties as one way of identifying bacteria phenotypically. It's a cucumber seed. So, it won't come off my hand. So, the yogurt is sour because it starts out as milk, but it has lactic acid bacteria growing in it. Ooh, there's actually gas kind of bubbling forth from the cucumber. There are lactic acid bacteria growing in the yogurt, breaking down things like the lactose, the sugar that's in the yogurt, and they are producing as a metabolic end product this lactic acid, which is an acid, so it tastes sour, and that's why yogurt has a sour taste. Yes?
That's the same acid that builds up in muscles?
Yes, yes. Lactic acid is the same acid that builds up in muscles. And the reason that lactic acid builds up in muscles is because when our when our muscles don't have access to enough oxygen, in order to continue making ATP so that they continue to function, they switch from oxidative phosphorylation to a fermentative pathway. And the fermentative pathway that our bodies use is lactic acid fermentation. So yeah, our muscles are making the lactic acid for the exact same reason that the bacteria that make the yogurt makes the lactic acid. The pickles also are sour. These are half sour pickles. Not because of vinegar, but because of lactic acid bacteria that actually traditionally would have come in on the cucumber, and they are growing in the presence of the cucumber, and they're fermenting, and they're producing lactic acid, which makes the cucumber sour. And I'm not sure what goes on with the chutney. I'm not even sure whether or not whether it legitimately can be called chutney. But I'm not sure if what I'm eating here is actually a fermented product. But apparently there are, in India, these things are fermented products. I imagine that it would be, again, lactic acid bacteria, but I don't know for sure.
Aren't there living cultures in yogurt? This is the only thing that's containing living cultures.
Yeah, so you can pasteurize the cultures, the yogurt, after you've processed it, or in the process of processing it, and therefore kill the cultures, or you can just put it in as is with the culture still growing. The cultures are the thing that created the yogurt from the milk in the first place. In the olden days, these were all wild cultures, and then people hit upon cultures that they really appreciated, and they kept those cultures. Kind of like when you have sourdough and you've been passing down your sourdough culture from generation to generation. I'm not sure how long sourdough stays in families, but basically you've got wild cultures that you've come to appreciate in terms of the production of bread, and you're keeping them alive, and you're taking a little bit of them from the bread, from the dough, from the culture, the sourdough culture.
People actually do that?
Yeah. Yeah. This is the way things were done before we had modern technologies.
I think I'd like the modern.
So, say it again?
Brewer's yeast was a big reason for modern civilization.
Beer. Brewer's yeast, excuse me, is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and baker's yeast is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, although I imagine they're different strains from each other. In fact, I know that they are. This is sourdough bread. So this is made with a combination of yeast, which produce the ethanol and the carbon dioxide. Ethanol is not part of the bread that we're striving for, although in beer, to a large degree it is, although preservation is also an important component of fermentation. It's not just changing the taste or producing alcohol. But in sourdough bread, in addition to having the yeast so that the bread rises, you also have lactic acid bacteria, which impart the sour taste to the bread. Tabasco sauce, basically made the same way that these pickles are made, although the process is much longer, so that you have fermentation of the peppers. I mean, this goes on for years to make this.
That's why it says aged 3 years. The bottles I had at home that I stole from Chipotle. So
Yeah, actually, this one doesn't say anything. I'm not sure what they use to ferment the soybeans to make soy sauce, but I imagine it's yeast. I don't know for sure. Who knows? Who knows? Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce says distilled white vinegar, molasses, water, sugar, onions, anchovies, salt, garlic, cloves, tamarind extract, natural flavors, and chili pepper extract. And what they don't say in here is that they ferment this stuff for years before they bottle it.
if you wanted to start a plant that makes Tabasco sauce, you have to make all of it 3 years prior.
Well, actually, let's go to a more familiar product. When you're making some kind of aged alcoholic beverage,
Okay.
I don't know what kind. What's a good bourbon? Wine? Well, it's true. Wine, yeah. I mean, wine certainly. White wine you don't age, but red wine you do let it sit for a while. But yeah, I mean, so bourbon. I don't think whiskey. Whiskey, I think, is something that's maybe whiskey is. Whiskey is aged? Yeah, okay. Moonshine is not, however. but yeah, so when you're making this, you're making up batches, and there is a substantial amount of time before you can actually start selling the batch that you're making. If you've got a scotch, a single malt scotch that's been aged for 12 years, that's been aged for 12 years. I mean, this isn't fermented for 12 years, but they put them in barrels and what have you, and it imparts a flavor on the whiskey or the scotch or what have you. Kimchi is a fermented cabbage and other kind of product. Cabbage, mustard, carrot, leek, chili, baby corn, garlic, vinegar, sugar, salt, and water. And so you mix these things together, you kind of squeeze them together so that the tissues of the plant are more readily invaded by the bacteria, and the bacteria that are on the plant itself start fermenting, mostly lactic acid bacteria, making lactic acid. Although when you're making something like kimchi or you're making something like sauerkraut, you're going through multiple successions of bacteria. The bacteria that grow best are the first ones, and they make lots of acid, and then they reach a point where they can't grow in the high acid levels that they've created. And so another bacterium that is already present there starts to be able to outgrow them. And they make more acid and reach a point where they're no longer able to survive, and something else takes over, and so on and so forth. This cheese. So the cheeses are made with bacteria or with fungi or enzymatically. So it starts out with milk, and then in the case of Swift's cheese, it's a propionic bacterium that actually makes a gas in addition to the lactic acid bacteria, and the gas is what collects as these bubbles. Have anything else here? And then we've got the pepperoni. Nobody wants pepperoni? You can either come up here for it, or we can give it to you after class. But the pepperoni, I don't know if this particular pepperoni was prepared this way, but the way pepperoni is traditionally made is you mix together your meat and whatever, and either bacteria are added or the bacteria find their way in there naturally. And you let it sit and ferment, not in the cold, but in relatively warm temperatures. And also a part of the process that makes these hard is that you let the meat dehydrate in the course of this fermentation. And eventually the dehydration presumably reduces the amount of water enough that the fermentation stops. But in the meantime, you get a preserved meat. It's preserved in part because you've got these bacteria that are growing that are keeping out bad bacteria that are growing. And it's preserved in part because the water's gone away, and also because various kinds of things that bacteria like to eat have been used up by the bacteria that you inoculated with. So pepperoni is a fermented product. And I have to say that that combination of yogurt and the hot mango relish, fruity and chunky, extra hot. It says mangoes, vegetable oil, salt, chili powder, mustard, fenugreek, spices, acetic acid, and flavoring. The acetic acid might be in there because it's not a fermented product, but this is hot. And the combination of the slight sweetness of the cucumber with the yogurt and the hot mango actually is, I think, quite good. Okay, so that all forms a segue into talking about microbial metabolism.